All right, so thank you everyone for coming today. We're very excited to have Perri Kersh here with us, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. She is an organizing expert. She began her career as a time management consultant and study skills specialist in 1992, but truth be told, she's been organizing most of her life through various careers in counseling, marketing, and consulting. She finally settled into her passion, starting NeatFreak Professional Organizing in 2005. She works with families, small business owners, and students. And she's also the president of the North Carolina chapter of the National Association of Productivity and Organizing. So we are very lucky to have Perri here to talk with us about downsizing and right-sizing your home and your life. So Perri, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, Kendall, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I have done more Zoom calls just like everybody else during this time. And it's been such an interesting year because everybody has been spending more time at home in the past year. So I think all of us have been looking around at our houses and maybe with perhaps a more critical eye about the things we surround ourselves with. Home improvement projects are like going through the roof, and the Container Store, which is a place I use to source a lot of products for clients, is constantly sold out of stuff. So I know that organizing is something that has been on people's minds. And so because we have a small group today, I love it because I can totally tailor this talk to you all and make sure that I'm addressing specific needs that you have. I'm going to be talking to you all as if you yourself are in that right-sizing kind of downsizing frame of mind. And it might be that you're thinking about doing that in your own home. It might be that you're doing that for someone that you're caring for. And but all of these things I think apply across the board. So feel free to jump in with any questions if you need me to kind of customize it for you in some way. I'll share my screen in just a few minutes, but I wanted to start with a question just to give you all something to think about. If you had to guess, how many things do you think you have in your own home? How many items? I'll give you a second to think about it. If you're feeling really brave, you can throw a guess into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and tell me. But I just want you to think about it for a minute. Think about, your closet, if you've got an attic or a garage, your junk drawer, those closets that things get stuffed away back into the back. Just think about it for a minute. How many things do you think you possess? Any guesses from anyone?
I would say 100,000.
Okay, 100,000. That's a really good guess. Yeah.
I was gonna say 10 to 20,000 at least.
Okay. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Well, according to the National Association of Organizing and Productivity Specialists, the average American household contains 300,000 items. And if you also consider that the average American household is about 2,300 square feet, depending on the size of your space, you could scale up from that number or you could scale back from that number. What I do know from being in houses, my whole life myself, but also professionally for the past 16 years, is in the United States of America. If we have the space, we will fill it. So if your house, people come to me all the time and they're like, I really think I could solve my organizing problems if I just had one more room or one more storage space. And I'm always like, typically what I find is having more space does not solve the problem. More space just means you're going to have more stuff. And it allows you to delay those decisions. And one of the definitions we use in my industry for what is clutter is that cluttered is delayed decision making. It's stuff we hold on to because we just can't decide. Do I keep it? Do I let it go? Do I give it to someone else? Should I sell it? Should I donate it? What's the appropriate place for it to go to? We delay those decisions, and that's what allows stuff to build up around us. A couple of other just interesting statistical pieces about our stuff and our relationship to our stuff. A group of psychologists did a research study where they talked to people who self-identified as being stressed. And 80% of those people said that the stuff around them in their home or their office negatively impacted their stress levels. So stuff in and of itself can bring us down. It can weigh us down. It makes us feel heavy. It makes us just feel like we're not on top of things. Another interesting stat that the company IKEA found that the average person loses 55 minutes a day looking for lost or misplaced items. So when you add all of these things up, it's just, I think it becomes apparent how much our stuff can impact us. And it's not always necessarily in a positive way. Marie Kondo talks about sparking joy and how our things should spark joy. For us, I tend to deal more in the realm of what are things doing to us that aren't sparking joy? Like, how are things that we surround ourselves with impacting us in a way that makes us feel stressed? It makes us feel like our home doesn't reflect who we are. It makes it hard. I mean, back in the day when we all used to have people over, our stuff sometimes might impede our social relationships. It might keep us from entertaining in the way that we want to, or feeling like we can have people over easily or spontaneously without having to spend a ton of time cleaning up and preparing for that. So I think there are a lot of negative things that can come from having too much stuff in our life. So I'm going to start. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if I can be successful in doing that. Are you guys seeing the slides now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Awesome. Love it when I get that right the first time. Doesn't always happen. So I'm just going to walk you guys through first a definition of right sizing. I'll tell you why I call this talk right sizing rather than downsizing. Downsizing, when I think of that, I think that means you are moving into smaller space. You might be moving to a community for, assisted living community, or you might be moving from a large home you raised a family in into an apartment or a townhouse. And I have found that not everybody is necessarily doing that now. There are more people who are deciding that they want to age in place and stay where they are. And that might let you off the hook a little bit about your stuff and what you want to do with it, because you're like, well, we're going to stay in this spot, so why do I need to get rid of anything? But I think right sizing is something that can apply to anyone, whether you are moving or staying put. My definition of right sizing is the act of reducing our possessions so your home has the right amount of stuff that you need, you use, and you love, and it accurately reflects who you are and how you want to live. And I think it's something that anyone can do at any age or stage in your life, just to, kind of have a little moment of getting some clarity about the stuff you want to surround yourself with and how you want that to be a part of your everyday life. So I'm going to walk you all through 7 steps of this idea of right sizing, just to give you some tips and some strategies and some things to think about that might apply in your own life or the life of somebody that you're helping to take care of. So I think one of the first and most important steps in the right sizing project is to figure out your why. Why is it important for you to do this? And this idea of figuring out your why, it applies to anything in your life where you're trying to change behavior or, set a new goal for yourself, where you want to do something that is going to require change in your life. And I think it's so important to determine that why up front when it comes to right sizing, because it's a long process. It can be an exhausting process. And if you have that why and you're really clear about that, I think it gives you that base to come back to keep you motivated and to keep you inspired and moving forward. So let's talk about what some of the whys might be. And again, feel free to jump in and unmute yourself if you want to share your own reasons why you might be thinking about this in your life right now. But why would right sizing or downsizing be an important goal? Some of the things that I hear in my work would be some people just want to save money. Having stuff can get expensive. You have to take care of it. You have to maintain it. You have to clean it. And it can cost money. And when we buy some stuff, sometimes that leads to buying more stuff to complement it or take care of it or go with it. And for some people, they're just like, I just want to stop that. I want to stop the madness of feeling like I'm spending all the fruits of my labor on things. I'd rather have experiences or something like that. So some people might say their why is I want to spend less. Another common why that I hear is I just want to save time. Having possessions also takes a lot of time. Again, you got to clean it. You got to move it around. Things that are related to maybe hobbies that we're not really fully invested in anymore can often, kind of take time for us to move around and take care of and deal with. I know just for my clients who have a lot of things in their homes, just the pure maintenance and cleaning of their houses takes up more time than they might be interested in. Another thing that I hear from people is they just want to feel less stress. When they walk in their front door, they want to feel a sense of peace and calm. They want their home to feel welcoming to them, but they also want to feel like it's truly a reflection of who they are. So that's another why that I hear. And then I hear from people too that are like, I just want to be able to pack up and go. Like, I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to go see my children and my grandchildren. And the bigger the home you have with the more stuff in it, the harder it is to do that. So there's some freedom that can come from the right sizing process as well. So I think it's important to identify that why. And if anybody wants to share their why, I'm happy to hear it. Sometimes it's a little bit of that saying it out loud owns it and means that you're more likely to stick with it. I also do recommend that you write it down once you identify what it is. Some people, I'll say, put it on a sticky note, stick it on your bathroom mirror. So it's a constant reminder. Put it in a journal, have it on a pop-up on your computer. So whenever you're feeling kind of frustrated or not super motivated, it pops up in your face and you're like, there it is. That's what I've got to get back to that, because that why really has some meaning to me. Any questions or thoughts about that from any of you as far as what your why might be, even if you're just thinking about this process?
I just appreciate how you named all these kind of feelings that I feel like I've had, like thinking about feeling less stressed and saving time. Like, I don't know if I would have called it saving time, but now that I think about it, yeah, the amount of time I spend moving things around, the dishes from the sink to the dishwasher, the laundry from all these places, like, oh, maybe this shouldn't go here, it should go there. And if I had less stuff, I would spend a lot less time moving it.
And going back to that IKEA research about how much time we spend looking for stuff, that's a piece of it as well. You know, the more things we have, the harder it might be to find the stuff we're really looking for. And I can't tell you how many clients I have that are like, well, I lost that item, so I bought another one, and then I found the original one, and now I have two of them. So it's both a money and a time loss there. So that's a pretty common thing that I hear. All right, we're going to jump into number 2 here. But again, feel free to stop me at any time if you've got a question or a comment that you want to share. So next step in the downsizing, right-sizing process is to define your strategy. How are you going to go about doing this? One of the most common reasons that people call me is because they're really overwhelmed by the process and they don't know where to get started. And so I always help people sort of figure out, where are you going to get started in this process? Because if you've been in a home for 30 or 40 years, you've raised a family there, and you're looking at attic to basement, every single thing you've got to go through, where do you start? And it can feel really, really overwhelming. And I like to give people, you know, some peace of mind around that, to say there's not a right or wrong answer to where you get started. The important thing is just to start. Sometimes I will help people identify that space that just might cause them the most stress in their life. The first thing they see when they walk in the door, maybe that's the landing pad where everything gets dropped when you walk in. For some people, it might be around paper management, because that can be a really overwhelming task, particularly if you're caring for somebody who has a lot of medical needs and there's a lot of paperwork generated from that. That can be really stressful. So it might be that that's what we want to get our hands around first. And sometimes I encourage people to start with a really personal space in their house, like their bedroom, because it is the first thing you see when you wake up in the morning, and it's the last thing you see when you go to bed at night. And if that space feels overwhelming to you, it doesn't feel restful, it doesn't feel like a place where you care for yourself, then it's a place you can't enjoy being. And it can also impact your sleep negatively. It can impact how you feel about yourself. It can impact your ability to just get dressed in the morning if your closet is a mess. So sometimes we'll start in a real personal space. But the important thing, again, is just to get started. And I like to help people break that task down. Again, if we're doing a whole home downsizing project, break that task down into manageable bits and pieces. And this is where I like to talk a little bit too about the timing of this. So often I get called in to help people when it's in the middle of a crisis. It's like somebody's had a healthcare crisis, or they've got to move in a certain period of time and nothing has been done. And that can be really hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it can be really hard. I think the earlier you can start this process, the better. Even if you think you're not moving out of a home that you're in for 5 years, it's a great time to start thinking about that right sizing process right now. What's the low hanging fruit, the stuff that's just been sitting around for 15 years? I mean, I've been into houses before that where someone had lived there for 20 years and there were moving boxes from when they moved in that they've never unpacked. And sometimes I'll just say, I promise you, whatever is in there, you're not going to miss it. You don't even know what it is. And so let's see if we can't get some of that stuff out of the house. We're going to look at it first. I'm not going to just pitch it right in the trash can, because I have found gold watches and, birth certificates and, savings bonds. I found all kinds of important things mixed in with people's junk, but look for that low hanging fruit and think about how you can start that process as early as possible. It is so much harder to do it when there is a crisis, because the important thing in that situation is taking care of someone's health and getting them to a place where they're safe and can be cared for. If you're trying to make all these decisions on top of that, then it just adds to the stress. So the earlier, the better. The next thing to think about when it comes to your strategy is just recognizing that you really do have to pull it all out to see what's there. And this is where I have to really work to manage people's expectations that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And this is where it can feel really overwhelming. Again, imagine an attic that you've been stuffing things in for 20 or 30 years and you really don't even know what's up there. We're going to have to pull it all out and we're going to have to look through it. We're going to have to open boxes and open bins and open files and go through those things. And again, this is where the timing piece can be really helpful. The more time you give yourself to do that, the less stressful it is. And the more you can break it down into those manageable bits and bites and sort of deal with it in that way. But you really do, for every closet, for every drawer, you've got to take it all out and see what's in there. And then that next piece of this strategy is that you're going to sort and you're going to categorize. You're going to pull everything out and you're going to break it into some specific categories. And the rule of 3 that I typically work by is that you're going to keep it. It still serves you well. You love it. It's important to you. You use it. And so it still gets to go into your space. You're going to give it away, which means you're probably going to donate it or give it to a child in the family who might have interest in it. Or you're going to give it to a friend or someone that could use it, or it's just going to be trash or recycling. And those are the 3 categories that I most often set up for people. I try not to make it more complicated than that. Sometimes we can get really caught up in things going to the perfect place. And that can really be a roadblock, because if we're trying to find the perfect home for every 300,000 things that are in our house, and we're only going to keep maybe a third of those, it really slows the process down. So I do my best with things to just keep it out of the landfill, but get it to a useful place where somebody else can find it as a treasure, but it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. Any questions about that at all?
Yes, Perri?
Yes.
You'll probably come back to this, I guess, about how to find a place for some things are obvious, but others, that's one of my struggles right now. It's my why, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I want to be ready to move when I decide I'm ready.
Sure.
And there are a lot of things, some of which were my husband's, and he's not here to say what, and I don't think he would even know any more than I would, who to call or where or how to sell certain things.
Sure.
He's got, collections of a couple different kinds of things, and just, stuff that's, I just would like to figure out how to find the right way to find new homes for those, or sell them if possible.
Sure. And I have a list, Kendall, that I will email to you that you can share with the group. It is a resource list that I use when I'm downsizing or right sizing with people, that has a lot of local resources here in the Triangle. It's hard when you're cleaning out a whole house, because sometimes what I have to help people try to balance is their perceived value of something versus what is real fair market value that you might get for it. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the emotions of stuff a little bit. Antiques are really tricky. You know, I have some beautiful antique furniture in my house that I inherited from my parents that is from the county that I grew up in, and it's just beautiful. But my kids have no desire to take this dark brown, heavy wood furniture that I've had with me since my childhood and have it in an apartment. Like, they're just not interested. And so finding a good home for that, where at least I feel like it's not just going to go to the landfill and get shredded in the wood chipper, can be really hard. So, but one of the resources that I do have on there, I work with an eBay reseller who's down in Pittsburgh, and he's on my list. He is always willing to take a look at something. If you have some collectibles that you feel like are of value, I tell this story a lot about a coin collection that my husband had, and it had some bills in it that he had since he was a child. And there was this $5 bill in there that it like struck me because it almost looked like fake money because it was larger than normal. And I sent a picture of it to Chris, my eBay guy, and he was like, let me do a little research. And it turns out that it was some $5 bill minted in like 1921 or something like that, and it ended up being worth over $2,000. And so Chris was able to sell it on eBay, and he takes a percentage of that. He's like a consigner. But you know, there are those rare things that we find out there that are truly valuable, and sometimes those are the things that hold us back, because once you hear that story, or you know you've got that one experience like that, you're like, oh, what other treasures do I have sitting around here? So you know, I think sometimes having an organizer come in can kind of help you weigh some of those things just from the experience of seeing what's out there and what's of value. I do work with furniture consigners who can come in and take furniture consignment. And again, you might get 50% of what they sell it for. There are several, you know, auction houses locally who you can auction furniture through. So there are lots of possibilities out there. And then I try to help people simplify some of the large items that just, you know, probably aren't of great value, but are still in really good usable condition, and have one of the local charities that can come and pick those items up for you, just so it can get rid of a lot of stuff in a small amount of time. I use Trosa a lot out of Durham because they will take clothing, they'll take household goods, you know, kitchen items, they'll take furniture, and they can make a lot of things go away in a short period of time. So I try to simplify that process as well. That kind of address some of your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the emotion, some of the emotional reactions that can go with this process. Because as I mentioned up front, it can be a long process. It can be challenging because it's our stuff, you know, it's the things we've moved around. It can be the things we've inherited. Things have a way of representing relationships that we've had, but it also can represent a piece of us. If it was something that we did as a hobby or a job in the past, it could have been some things that are representative of our entire career or educational opportunities. And so it can be a really emotional, you know, experience to go through a lifetime of stuff and have to make decisions about it. The two most common emotions that I see pop up in situations when we're doing a really large right-sizing project are the emotions of grief and guilt. The grief piece, you know, comes when it could be something that, again, we inherited from a loved one, something that reminds us of someone that's no longer with us, or something that even represents something that is no longer a part of our life. I've worked with people who were elite athletes before, but have aged and can no longer do that sport anymore. And finding things that are related to that can sometimes be really painful. You know, it can be really hard to, maybe somebody was a great ice hockey player and then they still have all their hockey equipment because that was really important to them, but that's big, bulky stuff that takes up a lot of room and they're clearly not getting back on the ice. Going through and saying goodbye to those things can cause a lot of grief to come up. And so I think just being aware that that type of emotional response is going to pop up is important. Guilt is another big one that I see, you know, clients who have been gifted things from a loved one, or, you know, something was passed down to them, or something that a spouse gave them that is no longer with them. And that item might not serve them anymore. They may not have even liked it in the first place. It might have just been something that someone thought was their taste, but it really wasn't. But it still represents that relationship. And so helping people work through those feelings of guilt of letting that go, not feeling like you have to be the keeper of all the things that have been passed down for generations, and sort of giving people permission to let those things go, is just sort of part of doing this work. I will sometimes help people, by snapping pictures of things and saying, we don't have to necessarily keep the physical item, but let's take a picture of it so that you can remember what that was. If you've inherited something like a china set from a grandmother, I will say, for those of you who have adult children, if you ask them, they don't want your china, probably. It's unlikely that they want to take that on. Just nobody entertains like that anymore. So sometimes I'll say, instead of keeping the whole set, maybe just keep the teacups, maybe just enough to have a tea party with your grandchildren, or to have friends over for coffee and dessert and just use the teacups. I've also had people set a table with the whole set of china, and when everybody left, they had to take their place setting home with them. So it's a way of sort of like parsing it out and saying, everybody gets one set. And then there are some things that do have some value, and this is where it can get a little tricky, going back to that earlier question. There's replacements in Greensboro where you can send china. Silver, not silver plate, but actual sterling silver does have value. Even if it's a pattern that you're not crazy about anymore, it can be sold by the weight, and it can actually bring you a decent amount of money. So there are some things like that. If you're ready to part with it, and you can deal with the guilt and the grief and all that goes with it, but you're like, hey, I'd rather, sell that and take a trip to Paris next summer, you might be able to do that. And there are some local resources for that I think is on my sheet Kindle that I'll give to you. But I think when it comes to the emotional pieces of it, I try to help people go back to that why. Why did they want to downsize or right size in the first place? And let that be the driving force. Circling back to that sometimes when people really get stuck can be really helpful, just to kind of push back on some of those emotional responses. The next thing is you'll get by with a little help. Again, this process is long, and it can be hard and physically exhausting and emotionally exhausting. Having somebody there to help you with this process, I think, is so important. It can be a friend if you've got, if you can do this safely, a friend that I always say, pick your friend who is your tough love friend. Who is your friend who's going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit and say, do you really need 27 coffee mugs? Or, you know what, that outfit, that just don't work for you anymore. Like, who's going to be your friend who's going to be really honest with you and hold you accountable for some of that decision making? I think that's really important. You could do a trade if you've got another friend going through this at the same time. Say, I'll come spend 3 hours at your house. You come spend 3 hours at my house. Let's kind of both help each other and support each other through this process. I do think it can be helpful to have somebody who can be objective with you, who's not as emotionally attached to the things. One little trick that I do when I'm with my clients with clothing is I don't let them touch the clothing, because sometimes we have this tactile relationship with our stuff, and once we touch it, we immediately connect to it again. Even if you haven't worn it in 6 years, like all of a sudden you pick up that fuzzy sweater and you're like, oh, why haven't I worn this? I love this sweater. So I try not to let my clients touch it. I hold it up and I'm like, let's get real. Do you really want this? When's the last time you wore it? It smells like mothballs. Come on, be honest. And not letting them have that connection to it can be really helpful. So having that person who can be objective, who isn't as attached to things, can really help. And it is one of the reasons that if you are going through this process, you might consider hiring a professional downsizer or professional organizer to help. We've all been in hundreds and hundreds of houses. We have best practices in mind. We're not attached to your things. Sometimes we can also be a little bit of a buffer between you and other family members. I tell people all the time that I'm Switzerland. I'm here to come in and be in the middle. I'm not, in the middle of your relationship. I'm all about preserving relationships and trying to keep the peace and help people remember that at the end of the day, the relationship matters so much more than the stuff. And so having that objective person there who can sometimes communicate with adult children, and, there are professional downsizers who will come in and they'll just help you put an inventory together, divvy things up between kids most, equitably, and even ship it to them. So thinking about having some support and some help through this process, I think is really important. And I would encourage you, especially if you're doing a whole house, to get as much help as you can afford to bring on, or trade it with a friend, if that's something that you're able to do. So the next step is sort of a fundamental organizing principle, and this is a place for everything and everything in its place. So once you've done all this work of getting rid of the extra layers of clutter that are around you, then kind of comes the fun part of putting it back together in a way that's sustainable and will help you stay organized once you've gotten rid of the stuff. One of the sort of queens of our industry is a woman named Julie Morgenstern. She was Oprah's first organizer. And she has this phrase where she says, if something doesn't have a place, it will always be out of place. And I think this really applies to all of our organizing tasks that we're doing, that things need to have a home that they go back to. And particularly if you are right-sizing within your home, or you've downsized into smaller space, making sure that everything has a home to go to is really fundamental. And there are a couple of different things to keep in mind when you're trying to decide what that place is going to be. The first one that I often talk about is accessibility. How the frequency with which you use that item should be a factor in where you keep it. So if it's something you use every single day, make sure it is front and center, easy to get to. It's in that easy waist-high drawer that you can easily open and pull out that tool and use it when you need it. If it's something you use much less frequently, then it can go further away in deeper storage. It can be archived. It doesn't need to be as accessible, but just making sure you're keeping that in mind when you find those homes for things. There's also the idea of keeping like with like, of tools that get used together, making sure that they get stored together. The example I often use is in a kitchen. If you're a big baker, just giving yourself a dedicated baking space in your kitchen where the tools go, maybe even the materials that you use for baking. If that's something you love to do, make it really easy by keeping all those things together. Same thing can apply in storage, like a garage. If there are tools that get used together, then make sure those items stay together. Another factor to think about, particularly if you're right-sizing, is safety. And that is a why that I often hear from my clients is, if you're trying to age in place and stay in your home, let's talk about the safety of the things that you have around you. And I've been in houses before with older adults who still had stairs, and they like to pile things on their stairs. And I'm like, you know what, this is just not a safe environment to have mail and paper that's slippery on your staircase, because you're just asking for a fall. So thinking about safety when it comes to deciding homes for things, like obviously not putting heavy things up high where you're going to have to, potentially strain your back if you've got to pull something down off a high shelf, or even really heavy things down low, where you're going to have to bend down to pick up that heavy item. I often say the most expensive real estate from a storage standpoint is the real estate that it falls between your eyes and your knees. Those are the easiest places to get and grab things that you need all the time. We don't want older adults having to climb on ladders to get things. You don't want to have to get down on your hands and knees and pull something heavy out from under a bed for storage. So thinking about safety and how that might apply. And that can also apply if you've got young grandchildren that might come over for medications and things like that you want to store out of reach to them. Just thinking about those types of safety implications when you're trying to find a place for things. This is also when you get to do a little bit of the fun part of organizing, which is buying containers. People love to buy containers. And when I first get hired with people will say, okay, give me a shopping list. Tell me what to go buy. And I'm like, we're not going to start shopping for containers until we know what we need them for. But once you've done all that hard work of getting rid of the stuff you don't need, you found a home for things, then it is okay to go out and get a couple of containers that can hold like with like. Sometimes it can make it easier for you to access something because you can put all the things that go together in a basket. And then when you pull that down, you have everything you need at the same time. And it can also be a really helpful way to set a limit on things. For people who like to read a lot of periodicals, magazines, newspapers, sometimes I'll say, keep a magazine basket next to your chair. When it gets full, you have reached your limit. When it's sliding off the top and you're stacking it above the sides of the basket, it's time for you to dump it upside down and get rid of the oldest stuff that's on the bottom and recycle it, because you have reached your limit. So sometimes containers can be really good ways of sort of creating some rules for yourself to say, like, I can only keep this many New York Times. It goes outside of the basket. It's time for me to recycle and get rid of it. And then the last thing to think about when it comes to a place for everything and everything in its place is labeling things. If you're sharing your living space with someone else, using labels is how we communicate about that home for things. It's how we tell other people, the person who's unloading the groceries, that this is where the cereal goes. It goes on this shelf. It's how we label the outside of containers. So if somebody else is looking for the batteries or the light bulbs, they know how to find it. So labels can be great tools if you have somebody who's coming into your home to provide healthcare services, and you've got medications, you've got first aid devices, you've got things like blood pressure cuffs and things like that. It can be really helpful to use labels in a linen closet so that everybody knows where, not only where to find that stuff, but I think more importantly, where to put it back, so that it goes back where it belongs. It leaves that little empty parking space for it, and labeling it lets everybody know that that is where it belongs. Any questions about those things at all, or about containers or where to buy things or anything like that? All right, I'm going to move on, and I just want to take a minute to talk about digital clutter. Because this is one that really does impact all of us. And I think what's tricky about digital clutter is that it's kind of invisible. You know, it's invisible until it's not. It doesn't necessarily take up physical space in our homes, but it takes up a lot of mental and emotional space in our lives. You know, if your desktop looks like this and you're trying to find a file, you know, you're going to lose some time looking for it. If your hard drive looks like a version of this, and you're trying to find a file, you're gonna lose some time looking for that. And even our phones now, you know, everybody gets so app crazy, like, oh, this app is gonna change your life. It's gonna be such an amazing thing. But I guarantee you, most people use about 5% of the apps that they have on their phone. So I think while you're in the process of doing this right sizing, it's worth spending a little time thinking about the digital clutter that you have in your life. And that can be email, it can be things you've signed up for that you know, you no longer order from them. Good grief, we just got through a really nasty long political season. We might have a million political emails that we were signed up for, and now we want to get rid of those. So how can you unsubscribe from that? So lots of things to think about related to email, of just making sure if there's something that you just regularly delete every time you get it, chances are that you need to unsubscribe from that, so it's no longer cluttering up your inbox. Digital photos are another issue for a lot of people. We're all walking around now with these expensive cameras in our pockets all the time, and it's just really easy to take pictures and screen caps and things like that. So taking a little bit of time to just go through and declutter that and delete it. I like to use time where I'm waiting for stuff to do that. Like if I'm in line for something and I know it's not moving fast, if I'm in a car pickup somewhere or something, I'll say I've got 5 minutes right now, and I'm just going to go through my camera roll and delete all that stuff. If it's not good enough that you would print it and put it in a book or have it put in a digital photo book, you probably don't need it. And we're all guilty of like screen capping things we want to keep and then holding on to it. And then it's like, why do I still have this screen cap from something from 9 months ago in my phone roll? So thinking about that as a way to get rid of things. This is not necessarily a digital thing, but I will talk a little bit about photos, just paper printed photos. This is a question I get from clients all the time. So if you've got boxes and boxes of photographs in your home, you know, thinking about what you're going to do with those can be a big part of that right sizing process. And I have had clients scan all of their photos. And it's not an inexpensive process, but it's definitely doable. And I'm not saying it's not an okay thing to do, but sometimes what you're doing with that is you're taking physical clutter and you're just turning it into digital clutter. I know when we used to print photos, we always printed doubles. So I have 2 of everything. And you would get those 36 pictures back, and half of them weren't great. Like half of them were either blurry or not a good picture or really too dark, or, you know, or you've got 6 of the same thing. And so you certainly don't need to scan all of those. If scanning is something you wanted to do, I have a great service and it's on my resource list that Kendall will have. So you could check that out. But it might be worth, it's worth the time prior to paying to scan them to go through and get rid of all the duplicates, get rid of the bad pictures, and only scan those that you really, really treasure and know that you would enjoy looking at on your computer. I could go on and on too about old VHS tapes, old forms of other media, and I have good resources for that locally. So if that's a question that you have, I'm happy to answer some of those questions too. All right, last thing is to change your habits. Once you have gone through this right-sizing process, again, it's taken a lot of time, it's hard work, it can be emotionally challenging, but it is so rewarding. And you've come out on the other side, you just want to make sure that 6 months from now, your future self realizes you still did that work and that work has paid off for you. So a couple of different recommendations for how you can really change your habits going forward. First and foremost, make it easy to let go of stuff. I encourage all my clients to keep a paper bag at the bottom of their closet. If they try something on and they're like, ugh, this does not make me feel like a rock star, just put it in the bag and be ready to let it go. Keep a box in your car or in your garage or near your car where you can just put stuff that is in your house that you're like, I don't like that vase anymore. It's out of here. So making it easy for things to go away on a regular basis will help you maintain that organizing system going forward. Also, creating a one in, one out policy, I think is really beneficial. If you are somebody who loves books, you don't get to get a new book until you've let go of an old book. If you love shoes, you can't get a new pair of shoes till you've let go of an old pair of shoes. Similarly, kitchen gadgets, like if you're somebody who loves to cook, you can't get a new kitchen gadget till you've gotten rid of something old that doesn't really work for you anymore. So thinking about that one in, one out policy can really help you maintain that organizing system going forward. And then lastly, I recommend that people have an organizing mantra. Something that you just sort of adopt as your little, it might be your why, it might kind of circle back to that reason you did it in the first place, but something that just helps you remember why this is important to you and why you want to live this simpler, less stressful, more peaceful life in your house. One of my very favorite clients it was a couple, he was a retired psychiatrist, and they were downsizing from about 4,400 square feet into 1,200 square feet. So pretty much for every 4 items they picked up in their house, 3 of them had to go. And it was a long process. We probably worked together for about 7 months, getting rid of everything from pianos to floral vases. They got rid of all their old letters. They got rid of wedding gifts they had never ever used, silver that they were like, why did I have this? I never even took it out of the box. And the husband's mantra that he said over and over again was, I'm living in the present, I'm not living in the past. And I loved that because it just was so representative of the process. And it was and it meant so much to him. He really meant it. He was like, I'm creating the life that I want to live right now. I'm not trying to live in the past of who I was when I was a psychiatrist and when my kids still lived at home and when I got these wedding gifts that obviously weren't even that meaningful to us. He really meant it, that they wanted to create the life they were in right now. And I just thought it was a really lovely phrase for him to remind himself of. He called himself NeatFreak Jr. the whole time we were working together. And he really wanted to get a gold star for everything. And so I started like literally giving him gold stars, like, God, you're doing so great. You're making all these decisions. So thinking about what that mantra might be for you, what would that phrase be that would help you to keep going forward, keep the process going, whether you're trying to do it in 2 months or 2 years, how can you keep yourself engaged in that process and remember what really matters the most to you? So that's what I have for you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can turn off screen sharing so I can see any other, anything that y'all want to put in the chat box. So I'll just turn it over to you all.
Thank you so much, Perri. I know that was really helpful for me and I'm sure for everyone else. So I will go ahead and stop the recording and then we can open up for some questions.